We're not trying to be an event that has thousands and thousands of visitors. We want to be compact. We want to be a kind of a boutique festival where people get to meet and mingle, and readers and authors get to chat. And there's a social side to it. And there's a community building over the years. So it's the start. It's the very first one. There'll be a few rough edges, but, the basics are there. We've got the authors, we've got the venues, and I think we've got some great subjects to talk about. So I hope anybody who's listening, if you want to come along, I know you're coming, Richard, so it'd be lovely to see you there.
Yeah, there will be food and drink. Don't forget that. There will be food and drink as well.
Yes,
There will be food and drink.
Hello and welcome to Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Hough, and I'm delighted that you're joining us as we get between the vines with some of the best wine writing out there. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and enjoy the show with the Italian Wine Podcast. This month, our guests are two renowned crime writers who have embraced Italy as the backdrop for their murder mystery thrillers, David Hewson and Philip Gwynne Jones. Hi chaps, welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yep, me too.
Great. So this is something of a first for the show because you're not wine writers, but you do have very deep links with Italy, not least its food and wine, which I know you both enjoy. Especially Negronis, I think, in your case.
Oh, we'll get round to those, I'm sure, yes.
Okay. So I'm very much looking forward to exploring some of that with you in our conversation. First, though, I just want to understand a little bit more about your backgrounds and your origins as crime writers. And starting with you, David, your journalistic career began as a 17-year-old.
It did.
At the Scarborough Evening News.
Yeah.
You then went on to work for the Times and the Independent. So can you tell us just a bit about your life as a journalist, your work as a journalist? What kind of memorable stories did you cover?
Oh.
And how did that background prepare you for being a crime writer?
Well, I went into journalism because I wanted to write and I couldn't think of anything else to do. I always wanted to write books, but you didn't have an experience as a young person. So, I was literally covering flower shows and minor car crashes and court cases when I was 17. And then somehow clawed my way onto the Times and then the Independent and the Sunday Times. I covered business, I covered foreign reporting. I was the arts correspondent for a while. And then on the Sunday Times, I was a technology columnist for quite a while. So I did lots of different sorts of stuff. In terms of how journalism prepares you for being a writer, in one way, it's a great preparation because you learn that your words need to be edited. You're not precious about what you've written. And, I worked with some great journalists over the years and some great editors who taught me stuff that I was able to pass on to other people. And that's really important when you're writing, whether you're writing a book or a press release or whatever. You've got to take feedback. You've got to accept that people can improve your work. And I've found that a lot of people who try to become authors later on are just so amazed that they've actually written something that they don't want to change a single word, which is a real mistake. So that side of being a journalist is very good in that you understand that editing and rewriting, they're both incredibly important. The bad side of it is that everything that makes journalism good makes fiction bad, because as a journalist, you're trying to tell the absolute truth. And what you're trying to do as a novelist is tell a whopping great lie that appears to be the truth. So everything that makes fiction work would get you fired as a journalist. And I think you can get hooked up. I mean, some journalists who become writers become obsessed with fact and have to get everything absolutely right. And my approach is, if something is meant to be factual in a book, and often I will use factual stuff, then I will endeavor to make it right, but I will still feel the freedom to lie big time whenever I feel like it. So it swings and roundabouts, really.
Okay. And when did you make the transition then from journalism to fiction?
I knew that I had to find the time to write, because there was no way I was going to write a book if I was commuting into London into an office. So I eventually managed to wangle my way on to be a columnist, a weekly columnist on the Sunday Times, which meant I could work from home. So I was writing the book in the morning and then working as for the Sunday Times in the afternoon and the evenings. And then eventually I was able to, the books took up enough where I could just say, terrified my wife, but I said, that's it, I'm giving up journalism for good. And that was over 20 years ago. And with hindsight, I think I should probably have given it up earlier, but I was, there were kids and bills to pay, so I didn't. But it was always something I wanted to do. And it was I was in my early 40s when it happened. I'd actually given up. I'd stopped thinking about being a writer. And then we had a holiday in southern Spain at Easter. And the weather was absolutely terrible, awful. And there was a book on the bookshelf, an Ed McBain, great Ed McBain crime story, 87 Precincts. And I read that and I just thought, I'd forgotten this is what I want to do. And that prompted me into trying to write a book. And that's how it all started.
Interesting. And how did your career then take shape in those early days, finding an editor, having a story?
Well, it very nearly didn't. I wrote my first book, which I called Semana Santa. I wrote it and I followed all the things it tells you to do in the writer's yearbook, like you write a letter to all the agents explaining who you are and what the book's like. They all came back and said, we're not interested. We don't even want to read it. Who wants to read a book set in Spain? And I was spending a lot of time in America at the time. So I thought I'd get myself an agent in New York. I was about to go to New York. And I sent it. I faxed. These are the days of fax. There was no email. I actually faxed these things around to loads of agents. Everyone ignored it, apart from one agent came back and said, you can't do this. You're English. You need an English agent. My mate in England might be interested. Now, her mate in England was a wonderful woman called Vivian Schuster, who was like the queen of literary agents at the time. She represented everybody. And she worked for Curtis Brown. Curtis Brown had already said they didn't want to read the book. But Viv phoned me and she said, you should talk about it. And of course, I didn't say, actually, you've already said you don't want to read the book. But she did the thing of saying, I'd like to read the first 10 pages. Then she said, I'd read the next 50 pages. Then she wanted to read it all. And then she took it on. And within a space of 3 months, I had a 3-book contract with HarperCollins. And 6 months later, I'd got a film deal. Wow. And they made a film of it. It's a truly terrible film, but they made a film of it. So that's publishing. I think it's probably even more bizarre than that now. But back in those days, it was just your luck and a prayer.
And you, Philip, your background is completely different.
It's very different to David's. Yes,
you were born in South Wales, but ended up in Scotland working in IT. Yeah, and you made your first trip to Italy in 1994.
That's right. Yes, 1994.
Space Agency in Frascati.
The European Space Agency, that's right, yes.
Incredibly glamorous and
it sounds
exciting.
So sexy, doesn't it? And it really wasn't at all, no. I mean, I keep thinking about that line from Blade Runner about attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. And no, I was just compiling a database of scientific publications for universities and the like. So it was not a terribly exciting job. But on the other hand, I was living outside of Rome, and that was fantastic. And I always wanted to go back there. And when the contract came to an end, I ended up going back to Edinburgh. I met my wife there. And Italy was one of those places we always went on holiday. And Venice became our favourite place in Italy, which meant it was our favourite place in the world. And we tried to spend longer there every year. And we would always say, oh, wouldn't it be great if, one day, if we ever get enough money from retiring, if we could spend more time in Italy. And then the choice was made for us because we were both working in the IT department of the Bank of Scotland during the economic crisis, a bank that everybody who was working there knew was in very, very serious trouble. And we knew that there would come a time that we were going to lose our jobs. And wonderfully, I met a man in a pub who told me about a thing called teaching English as a foreign language, or TEFL. And I went back and told my wife about it, and we decided, well, okay, we're going to lose our jobs. Why don't we just take everything we've got, cash it all in, and we'll move to Venice and try and make a go of teaching English. So that's how we ended up in Venice. That's how we ended up in Italy. I didn't come here with the idea of writing a book at all. I wasn't going to write my, Under the Tuscan Sun or Year in Provence or anything like that. I was going to teach English, and I love teaching English. But I'd been keeping a blog because I knew this was going to be the most exciting thing we ever did, in middle age.
Yeah.
So I kept a blog to keep people back home in touch with what was going on. And then in 2013, it would have been, I put it out as a self-published book just to see what would happen, because I had 40 readers of the blog, and I was pretty sure I could sell more than 40 copies of my self-published book about moving to Italy. And I did. It didn't sell in huge amounts, but it was enough for a pizza and a bottle of wine every month, and I was happy with that.
Just give us the name of the book for our listeners.
Yeah, well, I mean, the original was called The Venice Project, but it's been republished by my current publisher. It's now called To Venice with Love.
Okay.
And that is available in the shops. Yeah. And then the next thing I knew was that I got an email from a literary agent in Scotland saying he'd bought it and he enjoyed it and wondered what I was writing. And all I had was the fragment of an idea for a crime novel, which he encouraged me through in the usual, send me 3 chapters, okay, send me the rest of it. And incredibly, he placed it. And my debut novel came out in 2017 called The Venetian Game. And now I'm writing the 9th book in the series, which will be my 10th novel. So Italy and Venice changed my life completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And amazing, actually, that although you both have completely different backgrounds, you both had this ally, if you like, this agent or this person who believed in you and believed in what you were doing and gave you that first helping hand.
Very much so. I mean, I think because it did take a while to find a home for the first book. It wasn't an overnight thing. It probably took about 6 months. And John just kept saying to me, look, I shouldn't be saying this to you, but I will be very disappointed if we can't find a home for this somewhere. And then there was quite a wait for the novel to come out. It was because publishers have their lists full up a long time in advance. So we signed the deal in 2015. The book didn't come out until April 2017, when I was just over 50 years old. So yeah, like David, we got there by different routes, but we came to it rather later than perhaps you might think.
Amazing. And so this first story, the Venetian Game that you mentioned, the first in the Nathan Sutherland series,
That's
published
right,
in 2017. So who is Nathan Sutherland, and what or who was the inspiration behind this character?
Nathan Sutherland is the British honorary consul in Venice, and this is a position which actually exists, although the actual honorary consul now works out of an office on the mainland. It's renting an office in Venice became too expensive. It wasn't worth continuing like that. But the inspiration was when I was teaching business English, and I had a wonderful client. I really enjoyed going around to his office, and he was a businessman who also happened to be the honorary consul to Thailand. Now, he was Italian himself, and he didn't speak any Thai to speak of, and most of his prospective clients, if we can call them that, were Thai, who were more likely to speak English than they were to speak Italian. And so whenever I went round there with a business plan, he'd say, oh, I'm sorry, Philip, I've got a bit of a problem. Can you help me with this? Maybe somebody's been robbed, or there might, vanishingly rare occasions, they might be in trouble with the police. And I thought, wow, what an interesting job. And I was really just coming together with ideas for the Venetian Game. And I thought, if my character was the honorary consul, he wouldn't have to be a policeman or a private investigator. People would come to him with problems, and that could lead him into, different situations and adventures. And if I made him the British honorary consul, I would be writing from the point of view of a foreigner living in Italy, like myself. And so if I get anything wrong, that's okay, because he's not a Venetian. He's allowed to get things wrong.
Yeah.
So that was the inspiration for the character, yeah.
I don't know if fortuitous is the right word, but it's just this coming together of being at the right place at the right time, and then having this...
So many things came together with that book. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant idea to have this character as the consul, because it just gives you so much scope to have these adventures, as you say, in Venice, and what better setting really for
a crime novel. Yeah, exactly. What a stage to work on, yeah.
David, your latest literary creation is also a resident of Venice.
He is, yes.
Or is he
Arnold Clover.
a friend or a companion of Nathan Sutherland, or do they lead quite separate lives?
They could.
I think they lead quite separate lives. I mean, Arnold, his genesis is quite strange because I spent a long time writing the Nick Costa series in Rome, and they are tough crime books, very much like the Ed McBain 87 Precinct thing. They're a group of characters who are kind of a family in the cops. And then I spent 3 years writing a novel called The Garden of Angels, which is set in Venice mainly during the Second World War and was to do with partisans on the run. And it's quite dark. It was quite a serious novel. It's about how Nazism doesn't go away. And given I started writing that in 2019, I feel slightly prescient, I guess, on that front. And that came out, and I wasn't sure what to write next. And then COVID and the pandemic arrived. And I just thought, I can't possibly write something that is dark. And also, I couldn't get to Venice very easily. So I wanted to write something that was actually much gentler. And Arnold came out of that. I mean, Arnold is, he's a retired archivist from the National Archives in England, who was widowed and moved to Venice and basically just wants to have a quiet life, going around working in the state archives from time to time in Venice, going to exhibitions, just being quite idle. But he's become friends with this Carabinieri Capitano, a woman called Valentina Fabri, and also a professional archivist at the National Archives called Luca Volpetti, who constantly just get him into trouble. So he's always having, he's about to have a quiet life, and he's never allowed to have a quiet life. And being Venetians, they always turn around at him and just say, "Why don't you have a quiet life?" But they're the ones who made sure his life isn't quiet. So they are much gentler books, and they are much more about Venice and the location of Venice than the Rome books. I mean, there's, the very first book, I was set out to write a murder mystery in which nobody really gets murdered, because I wanted to see if I could do that. And they're that kind of thing. So they're not, there's really, the body count is very low, and they're a lot to do with character and to do with mystery and to do with history and to do with culture and cultural aspects of Venice. So the latest one, the background to the latest one, is the career of Antonio Vivaldi, which is an extraordinary true story in that a century ago, if you asked anybody about Vivaldi in Venice, they just said, who's that? Never heard of him. I mean, he really did vanish off the radar screen for 2 centuries, and went from being like the biggest rock star kind of musician in Europe in like 1730 to dying an unknown pauper in Venice, in Vienna, 11 years later. So, and Venice is just full of things like that to me can prompt stories. So they're different. They're gentler books, and I really enjoy writing them. Doesn't mean I'm not going to write more standard crime again in the future, but and I think you can do different sorts. I mean, Philip's, expanded to doing stuff in Sicily as well as Venice, and I think as a writer, I quite like that. I'm not the sort of person who could just write, 40 books with the same characters. I think I'd find I'm very easily bored, so that would be tough.
Historical mysteries, I think, is how I've seen them described, rather, I suppose, than whodunits or crime fiction. The other book I wanted to ask you about, David, is the Romeo and Juliet novel. And in preparing for this interview, I re-listened to that. I'm a big fan of audiobooks at the moment, and this one is performed by Richard Armitage.
Yeah. That came about. I mean, this is how crazy this industry is. I was at the Thriller Fest convention in New York in 2010, and a very good friend of mine worked at Audible, and he said, we want to start doing Audible originals. In other words, not books that are being turned into audiobooks, but things that come out as audio in the first place. Have you got any ideas? And I said, no, I haven't got any ideas. I was really busy doing The Killing in Copenhagen and doing Italian books at the time. I haven't got any ideas. But then I sat down next to a lovely chap called A.J. Hartley, who's an Englishman who was a professor of Shakespeare in America. And we were just sitting there chatting. And I just said, has anybody ever taken a Shakespeare thing like Macbeth and written it as a story, not as the language. And he said, well, I'm sure somebody must have done, but we thought about it and we couldn't think of anybody. So we said to Steve, my mate at Audible, we think we could rewrite Macbeth as a novel, as an audio novel, using real Scottish history from the time. And we think that would be cool. And Steve just said, great, do it. And 5 weeks later, I'm hammering around the Moray Firth, trying to think of locations and where we went with it. I went into the tourist office in Inverness, and there was a young woman behind the desk, and I said, have you got anything about Macbeth? She said, what? I said, any historical connections? Apparently it's supposedly buried under a roundabout in Inverness, but she didn't tell me that. And she said, why would you want to know anything about a horrible man like that? And of course, Macbeth historically was actually one of the nicer monarchs, Scottish monarchs of the 11th century. Duncan was not a weak old man who was a nice guy who was murdered by him. He was actually a horrible man who got killed on the battlefield. So a lot of that we tried to introduce. And then Alan Cumming was brought in to narrate it. So, and it's so quick. We talk about publishing takes a long time. We agreed to do that in July 2010. We delivered it early in 2011, and by about May 2011, I was back in New Jersey watching Alan Cumming recording it, and it was out a couple of months later and won some awards. Then after that, we did jointly rewrote Hamlet, which was the first one that Richard Armitage narrated absolutely brilliantly. And these are not these rework Shakespeare, so there are lots of things that changed because, they're audiobooks, they're not plays. And then after that, Audible asked me to do another one. So I came to Verona. I spent a couple of weeks in Verona going around thinking about how would you do Romeo and Juliet? How would you make Romeo and Juliet work as a modern story? Yeah. And so I did that, and Richard, again, narrated that brilliantly. We won an Audie, which is like the audiobook Oscar with that particular one. And it makes huge changes to the play in the first place. So audio was great fun. I mean, I've always enjoyed audio, and doing audio has changed the way I write, because now I always think about the spoken word. Richard still narrates my Arnold Clover books. I mean, the next one's just coming out in a couple of weeks, The Four Deadly Seasons. And I managed to talk to him about how he approaches it, and I've seen him working in the studio, and you start to realize that, we're not essentially writers in the first place, we're storytellers. And that's how it actually changed the way I approach the work. And I'm really grateful to have the chance to do it.
The Romeo and Juliet one. And as you said, I mean, it's set, I suppose, it's not, you say it's a modern story, but it's set in the original Romeo and Juliet time frame, if you like.
Yeah. But it's not, they're not talking, they're not speaking historic language. I mean, it's funny, the responses you get. I had one, won all these awards, and then you've always got somebody who moans, whatever you write, somebody moans. Somebody came and said, well, why didn't they speak an Italian in an Italian accent? The people of Verona in the 15th century didn't speak Italian. It's just a nonsense, really. It's like, people, when you're watching a film and they pick holes and everything, but in some ways, when you're watching a film or listening to a book or reading a story, you have to suspend your faculties, I suppose, your well, I think
cynicism, and just embrace the story.
Yeah. I mean, basically, whether it's writing or an audio book, I think people don't want speed bumps. They don't want something coming at them where they think, hang on, why did they do that? What's going on there? They just want to be dragged into the story and live within it, for the time they're there. I mean, Richard did this amazing thing. When I first went in the studio when he was recording it, he was recording the nurse. Now, the nurse is this kind of comic character. And just before he went in, he said, I hope you're okay with the accent I've got for this. And I said, well, I'm sure it's absolutely brilliant. Now, the nurse is meant to come from Lake Garda, and she's a working class woman. He plays her as a really broad Brummie. It is an incredible, broad, funny, rough, Birmingham accent, and it works perfect.
Okay, this is the Italian Wine podcast, so I want to try and move things on to talk a little bit about how you convey and capture contemporary Italian life in your writing, whether that's in Venice or Rome or Sicily, and how important is food and wine in that regard to create a sense of place. So, Philip, I know you love a Negroni, so can you tell us a bit about your personal relationship with Italian food and wine?
Right, well...
but also about how you interweave that into your writing.
Yeah, I love cooking. I never used to cook. By the time I was 35 years old, I don't think I could boil an egg. I had no talent in that whatsoever. But my wife at the time, who is a very good cook, was working lots of overtime at that point, and she would come home and see me on the sofa with a glass of wine, watching the television, and I'd be there saying, "Oh, hello, dear, what's for dinner tonight?" And I realized very quickly that I could do two things. I could learn to cook, or I could get divorced. And so I decided to learn to cook, and I love it. And when I was working in IT, and I didn't like my job in IT very much, I found it made me happy at the end of the day. So when I started writing the Venice series, I knew that the lead character was going to be a British guy who enjoyed cooking. And I also enjoyed the fact that it's the Brit in the books who's good at cooking, and his Italian wife isn't really that bothered about it. I did get one, as David says, you always get people who are not going to like your books, and you learn very quickly that you're going to have to deal with that. But one review I did have, which kind of made me laugh, was saying, there's far too much in this book about food and drink. And I could only think, well, that's like saying there are too many elves in The Lord of the Rings. You know, you don't really understand what this book is about. But it's a wonderful way of introducing local colour and introducing shorthand. And, you know, you can write very sensually about food and its smells and, you know, the aroma of things cooking. And walking through Venice, you know, in the morning, there will be the smell of pasticceria and coffee, and it just pervades the city, I think. And very similarly so in Sicily, where I had to do an awful lot of research, eating all sorts, you know, going to the coffee shop every morning and buying the pastry of the day or the granita of the day.
That's a tough life.
It's a tough job, but, you know, if you're going to research things, then you're going to have to do it properly. So, yes.
I mean, one of the things I learned when I was doing the Nick Costa series was I enrolled at a language school in Rome, and I spent weeks and weeks and weeks there. And I discovered that food and drink in Italy kind of covers the same kind of role as going to the pub in England. You know, if people wanted to have a discussion outside the office, they don't go to a pub, they don't go to a cafe, they would go and have a pizza. That's how it was in Rome. And I thought that was... You know, that the fact that had that social function, I thought was very interesting. So, you know, in the books, both in the Arnold book and in the Costa books, that's what people do. When they want to have a discreet conversation, they will go somewhere. And I invented a Baccaro in Castello, where specifically they go for that. And also, I mean, going back to Romeo and Juliet, wine comes into that because it's Verona, so you've got to have wine in there. One of the many things you don't know from Romeo and Juliet is you have the Montagues and the Capulets hate each other. These two families absolutely hate each other. We never know why. And I thought, I've got to invent a reason why. And it's to do with who had the monopoly on the Garganega grape. They're both wine traders, and one of them thinks the other one stole the monopoly of the Garganega grape for that. In fact, when we launched it in New York, at the actual launch reception, Audible got in bottles of Garganega and bottles of Soave and asked people which they preferred. Richard preferred the Garganega. I have to say I'm much more of a Soave man myself, but you know, it's not just, you know, these aren't. I don't think you put food and drink into books as kind of a travel log. It serves the same social function, as well as giving people, you know, atmosphere and a feeling that they're actually there.
I mean, I introduced a bar called the Magical Brazilians on the Street of the Assassins. It is there. It's called the Cafe Brasilia. I called it Nathan calls it the Magical Brazilians. And again, because I needed him to have an office, I needed him, you know, somewhere other than his front room where he would talk about stuff, and to have his bartender as a kind of father confessor figure, if you like.
This is maybe a good time, Philip, to take a reading from the Venetian Sanctuary.
Sure, let's do that. I'll give you a little bit of background on this. I wrote this when the city was coming out of COVID, and when the city had kind of gone back to the Venetians for the first time, really in decades, possibly even longer. And so it's set in that period in between lockdowns where people were able to go outside again for the first time in maybe 3 or 4 months. So to set the scene here, Nathan has gone downstairs to his favorite bar, the Magical Brazilians. He's meeting the bartender, Ed or Eduardo, and his wife, Federica, who has got there before him. So that's the background. Ed smiled at me. Good to see you again, Nathan. It's good to be here, Ed. It still feels like a novelty, just being able to go downstairs and have a drink. You weren't here yesterday, though. That was a mistake, I promise. I'll never leave you alone again. He grinned. What are you having? I looked over at Federica. What was that? She swirled the ice cubes. Spritz bitter. Too early in the day for a Negroni, without very good reason, I thought. Have I been long? Oh, not too long. Just a spritz's worth. Okay, same again then. She nodded. That'd be nice. 2 spritzes then, Ed, and some random things on sticks. Eduardo looked pained. Look, do you have any idea how much time and effort and love goes into making cicchetti, and then you reduce them to random things on sticks? Sorry, in that case, can I have a small octopus on a stick, some olive ascolane on a stick, and some fried calamari rings on a stick? Yes, I get it. He turned to Federica. Fede, he asked, with hope in his eyes. Baccalà mantecato, a couple of sade fritte, and perhaps 1 half egg with truffle. Coming right up. He turned to me. You see, that's how you do it.
Beautiful Welsh baritone as well, Philip. I love it.
This is why I don't do the audiobooks.
Excellent. Lovely. And never too early for a Negroni. That's the only slight observation I would make.
Well, this is the thing, yes.
I remember actually myself coming to Venice in between lockdowns. We came across with my wife and kids, and it was, as you say, absolutely an amazing time, a unique time, because probably the first time in centuries there were no tourists.
Exactly. It was the stillness got you. Going out, because we weren't supposed to go more than, I think 300 meters from where we lived. And now quite a lot of that 300 meters from me is underneath the Giudecca Canal, so that limited it even further. But going out to do the shopping at Conad and seeing that there were no vapor trails in the skies, and there were no boats, no vaporetti on the canal, and it was the silence that got you, and the sky was just so blue, and the lagoon was so blue because it was like a mirror.
And the canals were full of fish.
You could see the fish in the canals. Yeah.
David, you're a frequent visitor to Venice as well, and I know that food and wine is also a very important aspect of your research. So, do you have any tips for visitors to Venice, where to eat and drink, or what to eat and drink?
My first tip to Venice is don't spend the entire time around San Marco and the Rialto, because they're not my favourite places. You know, I mean, where Philip lives in Dorsoduro. Dorsoduro is I think my particular area. I mean, there are 2 real live places that Arnold goes to regularly. One is the Osteria ai Pugni, which is right by the Ponte Pugni, near the Campo San Barnaba, which is a very small bar with cicchetti, and at lunchtime they do lovely pasta and things. Quite difficult to get a table. Often someone once blamed that on me, but I don't think it's just down to me. It's just a great little place. But the ai Pugni is a place that they will go to for intimate chats. And then there's a little cafe right by the Frari called Adagio, which is just a very nice little coffee place, get Negronis or whatever, and cicchetti. The one that I'll be using in next year's book, which I discovered, which is absolutely lovely, is called El Canton, and it's in the back end of Dorsoduro by Santa Marta, next to a canal and some kind of open space that actually used to be grazing for cattle. And that's got an outdoor place. It's near the university quarter, and it's just a delightful spot to sit and watch the world go by and the ducks on the water and the dogs and everything. So those are three of my favorite places. I mean, there is so much in Venice that, you can go to. And I mean, one problem with recommending anywhere is consistency, because I don't know if there's I don't know what consistency is in Italian, but I don't think it's a word that gets used very much. You can go to some place that's absolutely wonderful, and then 2 months later it's not. So it's difficult recommending places.
Well, I mean, places change hands so often. So, there are places I mentioned back in my first book in 2017, which have different owners now, and they've got no idea what they're like. So that's things like that will date so quickly. Yeah.
I have an extraordinary experience there was a wonderful place that set up doing craft beers from all over Italy. So absolutely brilliant. I tried some brilliant craft beers in there. And I went back, and I'd only been there like 2 months earlier. And I walked in, I thought, this has changed a bit. And the same guy was behind the bar, same owners and everything. And I said, can I have a beer? And he said, we're a restaurant. I said, when did that happen? He said, we've always been a restaurant. I was here 2 months ago. You served me at the bar where there were all these pumps. I was absolutely insistent. We've always been a restaurant, and I couldn't get a beer. So it's tough. And I don't know anywhere you can get craft beer now in Venice reliably. I'm sure there's somewhere, but I don't know where it is.
There's a lovely place in Verona actually for craft beer, Birreria Santa Maria. So that's highly recommended if you come across to Verona, but in Venice, I don't know.
Yeah, Vaccaria sometimes gets some interesting beers in.
But I mean, some of the craft beers in Italy now are really first class. Some of these small regional breweries have really got it together. It's not like the days when it was either a Peroni or a Moretti. There's some really good stuff, but you try finding it.
especially in Venice. It could be a mystery maybe for Nick Costa to try and resolve. Where are they?
Well, I'm going to Rome, so I think in Rome it's easier. It's definitely easier in Rome, yeah.
Let's take a reading, David, from you, if that's okay, from, I think, the 4 Deadly Seasons.
Sure.
This is where, do you want to give us a bit of context here or set the scene?
The 4 Deadly Seasons is a book that is structured like the 4 seasons. So it is spring, summer, autumn, winter, and 3 movements of each. But they are interspersed with kind of a flash forward. So at the very beginning, Arnold is actually at the end of the story, and he then starts looking back on what's happened. And he's been summoned to a place called Macondo. And this is a real-life beach bar at the foot of the Lido near Alberoni. It is fantastic. It's closed during the winter, but during the summer you can go there. You can have spaghetti alla vongole with clams that have been caught just in front of it. It's absolutely fabulous, very kind of eccentric place. So he's been summoned there to find out the secret of the mystery that we're going to read about afterwards. And this is what he says. I had to look it up. Macondo was the name of the shuttered beach bar, a bus journey down the Lido to the terminus, where the service stopped and waited for the ferry across the brief stretch of water to Palestrina. Then a lengthy stroll on a wooden boardwalk past what looked like a shuttered fish processing factory until I emerged by the sea. No matter how long I live in Venice, the place will always offer up some surprise out of nowhere. Here I was, just a few kilometres as a crow flies from the bustle of San Marco and the happy, expectant crowds about to embark on their New Year's Eve reveries. In a place so solitary and deserted, I might have been Robinson Crusoe, washed ashore on an empty, windswept strand. No idea where I was, no map, no clue which way to turn. Except, of course, I wasn't alone. My Friday was there already, seated at a bleached driftwood table at the front, hands warming over a fresh brazier, prepared for what was to come. Food, too, a wicker picnic basket, leather handles, and the label of one of the city's pricier delicatessens. Inside, packs of cold meat and cheese, bread, bacala, a bottle of Ribolla Gela, and some San Pellegrino. Let me see how much you've learned. A gloved hand passed over a glass of wine, then pointed at the two semi-briefs, one on the staff, the second below. What exactly is this?
Wonderful. Mouth-watering as well. I'm glad I've had my lunch already.
Yeah.
So you mentioned no matter how long you live in Venice, there's always something new. Philip, you've actually given up on Venice and cast your net further afield into Sicily, as you've already mentioned. What's the thinking behind
that? Yeah, well, I haven't quite given up on Venice. I don't want to do that because I know, but just for avoidance of doubt, because people do get in touch with me and say there will be more Venice novels, won't there? Yeah. When I was renewing my contract for the Venice series, and I did think actually about a conversation I'd had with David, as it turns out, about the fact that writers need to renew themselves every so often. And I thought, well, I guess this is my job now. I quit teaching a couple of years ago to write full time. And I thought, well, this is my job now. I need to keep myself fresh. And so I thought, why don't I just take a year out and do a different book in Sicily? And then maybe we could alternate Venice, Sicily, Venice, Sicily. And the reason was to try and keep myself fresh. And I thought it will help keep me fresh as a writer. It will force me to write in different ways. And I really love Sicily. I really wanted to have a go at setting a book there, which was not about the mafia, for a change. Because part of the idea, it's almost like about 15 years ago, my wife and I went to the St. Magnus Festival on Orkney. And I was just so struck by the fact that I met an archaeologist there who said, if you stick a trowel in Orkney, it will bleed archaeology. And Sicily is so similar to that. There is such an incredibly rich history. So many cultures have left their mark on it. And the landscape, the history, the music, the art, and yes, the food. It's in some ways it reminds me of Wales. It's about the same size of Wales. It's a small country with a much bigger neighbour, let's say, and yet it manages to maintain its individuality and its uniqueness, and I love it for that. And so it's the place other than Venice that we love most in Italy. It's the place that I really, really wanted to try setting a novel.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I suspect no one has ever said before that Sicily reminds them of Wales, so that may be a first. But
well, it's the size of Wales.
I completely understand what you mean, yeah, but also that sense of history and feeling of...
I think another interesting thing that you got there is to do with food and drink, which is very Italian, is how regional everything is, and also how tied to the seasons. I've just done a blog post for people coming to Venice Noir about castradina, which is this dish that you will only get in Venice for a couple of weeks each year in November, and actually stems from the bubonic plague of 1630. And, in England, you can buy mince pies in September, hot cross buns all year round. There isn't that cultural link between food and drink that's so strong here. I remember talking to a pasticceria in Venice and during Carnival. I said, so do you make fritelli outside Carnival? And he was quite offended, Of course we don't. That's what we do for Carnival. And those kind of cultural ties are very Italian and, great. I think they're great things to use in a fiction because, readers go, that's different.
And that very, very strong sense of seasonality as well is absolutely true. Like I remember when I moved to Verona in 2011, how strange I found it that, you could only get certain things in certain places at certain times of the year, where in Edinburgh, in the city, I was just so used to going to the local petrol station and buying a pound of strawberries if I wanted to in December, whereas, in Italy, that would just be unimaginable. Well, first of all, why would you go to a petrol station to buy food? But then strawberries in December would just be unthinkable. Yeah. Is there anything you miss, Phil, about life in Wales or Edinburgh or Scotland? you lead this kind of idyllic, charmed life, dare I say it, and between Venice and Sicily that many of our listeners would dream of. But there must be things you miss.
I used to get asked this all the time when I was teaching, and kids would ask me what I missed about the UK, and I could only really say it was family and friends. Beer up to a point, but there is good beer to be found in Italy.
Yeah.
You have to dig around rather more. And people used to say, do you miss fish and chips? And I would say, well, yes, when I go back to the UK, oh, great, have some fish and chips. And then after a few days, you start thinking, God, I really want to be back in Italy now, eating Italian food. So really, it's family and friends is the only thing that makes me nostalgic. There's very little else, really.
I mean, I think you mentioned beer. I would say pub culture is slightly different or completely different.
Pub culture is different, yeah.
And that's something that I miss. Fish and chips I miss as well. And a good curry is quite difficult to get over here.
I have had to learn to make curries, yes, and that was a game changer. Yeah.
And that's what we do as well. Now we cook our own curry.
But pub culture's dying in England. I mean, COVID killed pub culture. I mean, all of the pubs now are basically gastropubs. They make their money out of food. They don't make it out of alcohol. So, I mean, a very good friend of mine is a former pub landlord and hotel runner, and we were just discussing this the other day in the local pub that he used to run, where nobody stands at the bar anymore. There's food all day long. I mean, the pub culture has it is on the way out here, I think.
It's becoming a niche anyway, isn't it? In a way, I think the fact that it's dying, those that do survive are becoming more pronounced.
Yeah, that'd be different in Edinburgh. I mean, the big cities, it's still going, but certainly country pubs, a lot of them are closing. I mean, it's a bit grim.
Have you got any aspirations, David, to come and live in Italy, or even thinking ahead to your next novel? Are there any other places that would make a good backdrop?
I often wish I had moved to Italy, but it would have been very difficult. And thanks to Mr. Farage, more difficult than ever these days. I won't get on that subject because we'll try and keep the language clean. I mean, I've just delivered the next Arnold in Venice, which will be out next year. And after that, I will do something different. I'm going to go back to Rome. In fact, I'm off there in December to start thinking about what I'm going to do next. So, yeah, it is time to switch and do something a bit different, and maybe something that is more crimey and less gentle than Arnold's been. So I'm going to give him a bit of a holiday and see where that goes. But the contracts are all signed, but I'm not allowed to talk about them at the moment, I'm afraid.
Watch this space.
Yep.
One project that I do want to ask you both about that you're both very heavily involved in is Venice Noir. So can you tell us a bit about the origins of that project? Give us some dates and give us something about the genesis of that.
Well, I suppose it started back in 2022. It started upstairs in a bookshop called Libreria Studium with myself and David and Gregory Dowling. And we've been talking about doing an event for a few years, and then COVID got in the way, of course. And it's like, that story about how many people say they saw the Sex Pistols at the 100 Club or whatever it was in Manchester. Well, people were queuing down the stairs for that event.
It was extraordinary.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I'd like to say it's because we were all so fantastic and had so many fans, but it also was quite a small space. But nevertheless, we sold it out, and then the next year we used the Anglican Church in Venice, and we filled that as well. And then we started thinking that maybe we could do something a bit bigger, which was kind of like a Venice Noir 0.0. David, do you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, we thought we'd test the water by having different panels with a few more authors. We had no money, so we had to ask the authors to fly from England and basically cover their own costs for the whole thing. And I talked to some people who generously said yes. If you say to somebody, do you want to come to Venice and do a book event? Not that many people say no, I have to be honest. So we kind of tried it out there. And Studium, the bookstore, which is just at the back of the Basilica, is a great place and run by some great people. And Sylvia Bandolin, who kind of runs it, after every event we do, she'd get on to me and say, David, what are we going to do next? David. And we just got together and he said, well, why don't we actually try doing a proper festival? And we'd no idea where it was going to take place or who we were going to invite. We only knew that we wanted to do it over 3 days, and it had to be both English and Italian. Those were the starting points. But Sylvia's husband, Marco Vidal, who runs the big perfume company, Merchant of Venice, somehow found the time to take on the task of doing the logistics and got us into the Ateneo Veneto, which is an extraordinary historic building next to La Fenice, which we have for the 2 busiest days of the festival, was where most of our panels are going on. And because of the way we've done it, they're all free. There's no cost. You just have to turn up and hopefully book a ticket. You can book a free ticket online, but it is a very unusual event because, if you go to a book festival in England, it can be extremely expensive. So this is free. So we worked on that, and somebody else has set up the Italian side of it. And between the 3 of us, we've got, a compact series of panels. Our guest of honor is the great Ian Rankin. And we also have people like David Bishop, who writes historical series, normally in Florence, but that's in Venice this year. We've got Anna Mazzola, who won the Golden Dagger for the best crime novel of this year. So we've got a good range. We've got Barbara Nadell, who did the Istanbul books that were the TV series. We've got a different range of writers, and the panels are different. Often when you go to crime festivals, and Lord knows I've been to so many over the years, you have these kind of cliche panels that say, is location a character, or where do you get your ideas from? We're not doing that stuff. We are doing actual subjects. So Ian and Philip and a few others will be discussing that great movie, Don't Look Now, as the opening event. After that, I will be leading the prosecution of Giacomo Casanova, because we're going to put Casanova on trial, and Lisa Hilton is going to defend him. Gregory Dowling will be the judge, and Anna Mazzola, who is a lawyer in real life, will give us some legal guidance on whether he was a great romantic or, as I will make the case, an absolute cad. So I think, we've got different kind of content to most panels, to most events. And I think that's important because we're not trying to be an event that has thousands and thousands of visitors. We want to be compact. We want to be a kind of a boutique festival where people get to meet and mingle, and readers and authors get to chat. And there's a social side to it. And there's a community building over the years. So it's the start. It's the very first one. I'm always brought to mind that there's a great episode of The Simpsons where Homer somehow gets in charge of a nuclear submarine, almost starts World War III, and surfaces to find there are warships from China, Russia, I think it's Australia and America, about to blow him out of the water. And he goes to the front of the submarine and says, guys, I'm sorry, it's my first day. And everybody laughs, and that's it, So I'm waiting for the moment where I can just run to the front of the submarine and say, it's my first day, it's our first year. But I think, there'll be a few rough edges, but, the basics are there. We've got the authors, we've got the venues, and I think we've got some great subjects to talk about. So I hope anybody who's listening, if you want to come along, I know you're coming, Richard, so it'd be lovely to see you there.
Yeah, there will be food and drink, don't forget that. There will be food and drink as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
There will be food and drink.
Uh-huh. That's from Friday the 14th, Saturday the 15th, and Sunday the 16th of November.
It is indeed.
I'm coming to the event on Friday. Looking forward to hearing Ian Rankin and yourself, David. And as you mentioned, food and drink play not a small part in the itinerary. I think there are a couple of special events planned, Philip, is that right?
That's right. Well, we do have one panel about food and drink, but we also have now some of these events are full, unfortunately. I know on Friday night, David is in conversation with Ian Rankin on a crime and cocktail event. That is actually sold out. Gregory Downing and I are doing a crime and cocktail event on Saturday night at the Palazzo Experimental. There might still be a couple of tickets for that, but you'll need to get in very quickly. We're going to talk about great criminal minds and cocktail drinkers, and we're going to introduce the official cocktail of the festival, which the barista at the Palazzo Experimental was very excited about creating for us. And the third event, similar, is on the Friday night at the Car di Dio. There is going to be a dinner with the authors. Anna Mazzola is hosting, Barbara Nadell, David Bishop, Gregory, myself, Tom Benjamin. We'll all be hosting a table, and you get the chance to just sit down, have a nice meal, have a bite to eat, a couple of glasses of Prosecco, and just have a natter with the writers of the festival, because this is what it's all about. It's about meeting readers, bringing readers and writers together in the context of, hey, being in Venice, having a lovely meal, having a drink, having a good time, talking books.
We'll put details of where you can get tickets in the show notes, but yeah, good idea to check beforehand if tickets are available for the specific events. Before we wind things up, I always ask my guests what they are currently reading for pleasure. So what's on your bedside table, David?
I like reading a lot of non-fiction. I'm a big non-fiction fan, and I'm currently reading a book called Roads to Rome by Catherine Fletcher, who's a great writer and historian, who was actually at our event last year, a very, very interesting woman who covers all sorts of things. And it's a book about the roads that Rome built, but also what they meant and the social effect they had on the empire. And she's actually walked quite a lot of them. So she's gone to quite a lot of the places I know along the Appian Way, and also some of the really strange places that had, the old Roman road that went from the bottom of the Appian Way was to Brindisi, and then they went across to what is modern Durrës in Albania, and then there was a road went all the way to Constantinople. And she managed to do a bit of that, which is amazing, because that is really out in the wilds. So it's just a very, very readable book where you learn a lot, and you go to these places and you get a feeling. You get a feeling for it. So that's my current one. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's also on my to-read list, actually. She did an alternative history to the Italian Renaissance a few years ago, and that was also essential reading. So,
and she's currently writing a history of Beretta. It was to do with firearms in Italy. And I didn't know this, but Beretta were like the first gun company. I think they were founded in the 15th or 16th century. I mean, they go back that far. I always thought they were quite modern. But so that is going to be our next book, was about firearms, which, maybe that would be a good one to get for Venice Noir 2026.
It's a good call. Yeah.
What about you, Philip? What's on your bedside table?
Right. Well, it's almost the size of my bedside table because it was my birthday last week, and my wife, bless her, bought me a beautiful Folio Society edition of a collection of stories by H.P. Lovecraft. It is a beautifully produced book. It is so lovely that I'm terrified to actually pick the thing up and read it. That's the only problem. But on an adjacent note, I'm trying to improve my Welsh because my mum and dad have passed away, so I want to try and keep a connection with Wales, and I can do that by trying to learn Welsh or improve it. And so I'm actually reading a collection of H.P. Lovecraft in Welsh. I would have to say, for those of you out there who are learning languages, reading H.P. Lovecraft is a terrible way to learn a language. It isn't. Don't do that. Read comic strips or something like that, but don't start with H.P. Lovecraft. But nevertheless, I'm persevering with it. It's teaching me all sorts of interesting idiomatic language, which I'm probably never going to be able to use in everyday conversation. But nevertheless, the journey is a fun one.
Okay, I imagine that's not so easy to come by. H.P. Lovecraft in Welsh.
It's a very niche specific publisher, yes, but there we go.
I can't imagine how you could translate it, because his use of language is extraordinary in the extreme.
Well, I mean, I've read him in Italian and I've read him in German, and it isn't the easiest thing to do, and you can see where the translators have to make compromises with the language, because Lovecraft's approach to writing was very peculiar. He tried to purge his writing style of any non-Latin derived words, for example. Which so he was a strange fellow, and he's not the easiest to translate.
No, I'm sure.
Or read in translation.
Okay. On my bookshelf, for those that are interested, I'm, as you know, a big fan of William Boyd. So his latest release is The Predicament, which is a kind of intricate espionage thriller that shifts between London, Berlin, and Guatemala. So that ticks a lot of my boxes. Maybe I'll have to add some Welsh Lovecraft to that pile going forward. But also Catherine Fletcher.
It's what every book
Catherine
needs.
Fletcher highly recommended as well. So as ever, we'll put links to these books and all the books we've discussed today in the show notes. Final question. Where can we follow you guys? I know you're active on social media. You're both also blogging, I think, as well, quite regularly.
I'd like to be more regular, but I do have a website with a blog on it, which has got, apart from book-related stuff, there's recipes and all that sort of nonsense as well. But you can find me at philipgwynnejones.com. I'm on Blue Sky at PG Jones Venice. And if you look for me on Instagram and Facebook, you can find me there as well.
Okay, excellent. David?
I'm at davidhewson.com, and I do post from time to time, and there's a subscription form you can call up that will just send you the post as email if you want. It seems to work quite well. I'm on Blue Sky at davidhewson.com. I'm occasionally on Instagram and Facebook a bit, although I have to say I find Facebook incredibly complicated, and I've tried to steer clear of it. So mostly I'm active on Blue Sky, which I think is turning into something quite interesting. I used to be on Twitter where I had something like 7,000 followers, but I'm afraid the Nazi salute did it for me. And I don't want to be there anymore. But yeah, and if people want to get in touch, there's a contact form and all the rest of it. It's always nice to hear from readers, and hope to see a few at Venice Noir.
Yes, I will definitely be there. David and Philip, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for being guests on the Italian Wine Podcast, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing you both in Venice next year.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. Tune in again next month when we'll get between the vines with another great wine book. Remember, our show notes, including full details of all the books we've discussed today, are available at italianwinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods.